Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are going to get started in just a minute. I'm going to turn on captions so that people can have them if they want them. Let me pull up my slide deck just for a quick intro. All right. So good morning, everybody. As you probably know, I'm Jamie Jeanette. I'm with Health, Housing, and Homeless Services, and we host monthly trainings for our continuum of care homeless service providers and anyone else that's interested. And today we're going to have a great training about adultism and working with youth and young adults. And if you don't know what adultism, you will know what that means by the end of this training. Just a little bit of housekeeping. So as always, we keep folks muted during the training until it's time for questions, just to cut down on the chaos. So we ask folks to raise their hand virtually, or if you, for some reason, can't, like, turn on your video and wave your hands and we'll look for you. We just basic norms for our training. So we're asking folks to respect the trainers and your fellow attendees. Make space, take space, and share the mic. So this is about making sure that if you tend to kind of hang back and not ask a lot of questions, this is a good opportunity to challenge yourself and step into the fray and ask some questions. If you're a big talker like me, maybe try and dial it down and make room for other folks. Similarly, just acknowledging power and privilege. We're actually going to talk about that a lot today, I think, as we talk about adultism and recognizing our own privilege and power. So just being mindful of that. Just quick notes. So for many of you, this is familiar. We do these trainings once a month. They're almost always the second Monday of the month, and they are required for direct service staff and program managers. So some of them are required by federal funders. So you guys know it's like Housing First and that kind of thing. This is actually not one of those, but we think this is really important for people to understand some best practices for working with youth and young adults, because many of you, even if it's not part of what you do every day, you may have times where you're working with families with young people or end up working with young people yourself one-on-one. And so to me, this falls sort of under the cultural competence pieces that we have in our CoC and ESG written standards. There's nothing that the federal government's requiring for this, but we think it's really important for folks to have some basic understanding. Shelby, anything you want to say here?
Thanks, Jamie. Hi, everyone. Good morning. The only thing I would say here is what I say every month. Just a reminder, these monthly trainings are required if you're a direct service staff at one of our homeless service agencies. And myself or Mary have quarterly meetings with you all, and we check in then to make sure that you've been attending. Please let us know if you're not able to attend or you aren't, or you can't send your staff to attend. You can always take the training later. Just let us know. Thanks, Jamie. I'll turn it back to you.
Great. So the other piece before we launch into the content is we want you all to be thinking about equity. And I'm sure that's a thing that's going to come up in this training. But when we talk about equity, we're thinking about sort of unequal treatment of people based typically on things that they don't have control over. So that could be age, race, gender. So have you noticed inequities in your own work on this topic? And again, these are rhetorical, just to kind of have in the background. Have you contributed to or interrupted inequities in your work? And what barriers still exist, or how might they be addressed? And I think we're going to talk about that a lot today, actually, because this training, again, is really focused on sort of power differentials and how that plays out on the ground. So again, these are just things to seed in your brain as we're starting with the training. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Matt Anike from Matthew Aronson Consulting. And I'm going to stop sharing and let you guys share.
Thank you, Jamie. Hi, everybody. This is a fabulous audience. I'm so excited so many of you have tuned in with us. I love this training and I love this topic. I think if you've done, as Jamie had said, any anti-racism training, homophobia, transphobia, combating homophobia, transphobia training, a lot of the ideas and concepts will resonate because this is fundamentally about power. And this is fundamentally about different forms and ways of oppression and the way prejudice show up in our lives and our work. And adultism is really sneaky because it is so ubiquitous. There are lots of ways that it seeps into our language, our behavior, our expectations that are completely hidden to us. And just like some of those other forms of inequities, of oppression, of prejudice, it often sneaks in, even if we think we're well trained, even if we think we're well practiced, particularly if we're tired. And a lot of us have like really stressful jobs, working through traumas, working in really challenging situations where often we have competing values or competing methodologies in our head as we're trying to address and react and adapt to a situation in front of us. The primary reason I love this topic today is because I often work with some amazing colleagues who are a lot younger than I and have greater proximity to the experience of youth and young adults. And I'm so pleased to have my colleague Nika here, who's going to lead most of the training. And Matthew Aronson Consulting, so we work with communities around the country, and our primary purpose is to help communities prevent and end youth and young homelessness. We've met many of you over the last year working on your community needs assessment, strategic planning process, and we always talk about how youth partnership is so important, and adultism is the root of that. I'll say one more thing before handing it off to Nike. Training in adultism, just like any other training, requires consistency and practice. You can't get one training and then expect to be an expert in this, even if you've done it before. So we're going to encourage you to the end to look up additional resources, bring some of these practices home with you to your organization, to your family, to the place where you work and where you operate. And we're going to remind you that while adultism is central to the practice of authentic youth and young adult partnership, just because you've been trained in adultism doesn't give you all the tools and techniques and tips for implementing authentic youth adult partnership. We are going to focus on adultism today. Again, it'll give you some insights, some things to identify and reveal in what you're doing in your work. But I would encourage you to, beyond this, then explore, read about. We've got some tools in the handout that we gave you, how to deepen and implement authentic youth partnership, because it is really hard. Some very well-versed partners around the country have been doing youth and young homelessness work for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Really struggle with this because it's hard for a lot of reasons. So again, focus on adultism here. Again, this is a much larger practice that we encourage you to engage in, and hopefully we'll give you the seeds of it today. I'm going to stop talking, hand over to my amazing colleague Nike to kick us off. And Nike, you let me know and I'll start the slides.
Awesome. Yeah. If you want to pull this up and start sharing screen now, that's fantastic. But first of all, it's great to see everyone. It's genuinely, truly inspiring to see this many people interested in, excited to learn about this topic. It's really, really motivating to see. I'm really looking forward to our lesson today. I'm happy that we all find a lot of value in it, really internalize it, take it to the places that we operate in our community. Matt, if you want to head to the next slide, we can get started with introductions. I know a lot of you already did some introductions in the chat, but I think it's really important that we get to know each other as people all kind of involved in this youth focused system. So if you can, I would love if you could also reshare an introduction in the chat. We have a couple questions on the screen. We can share your name, your pronouns, who you're representing today, what organization. And we have a little go around question. What has been your favorite summer experience so far? So while you're putting that in the chat, you can go around and do that for yourself. So my name is Nico. I'm presenting Adultism. And my favorite summer experience so far, this is really an experience, but my favorite thing about the summer is that I get such a great opportunity to read a lot of books. I'm currently a student, so throughout the academic year, I'm doing a lot of academic student-y things. And summers when I can really read for leisure and for pleasure. So that's my favorite thing about the summer. I see people are already sharing some responses in the chat. People are saying the hot weather, love the hot weather. Matt took his 3-year-old daughter wake surfing.
Nike, I just want to flag your audio is like a little bit choppy. I don't know if it's
occasionally getting a little muffled. Is it still okay to?
I think go ahead, but I don't know if there's a way to make it better.
Yeah. Let me try and see if I can figure that out. Is it still being a little
better.
choppy?
Nope, that's much clearer.
Oh, fantastic. Okay.
Got some traveling abroad. not working. Ooh, someone went to New York.
Yosemite, that's a really fun one. Swimming in the ocean, love that. Celebrating Pride, awesome.
Yeah. For what I think of
Amazing.
as the hardest working field and sometimes the most challenging working field, this stuff is nice to see and really important.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. So while those introductions keep rolling in, we're going to start with the rest of the training. But I do want to say that we'll be working in small groups or pairs throughout this training. So if you need to leave early or you can participate verbally, um, just know that's something that's going to be happening. You might want to send a message to maybe Matt, letting him know whether or not you'll be able to participate, just so we can kind of think about that and account for that later on. But we really want to get started with talking about some group values that will really ground us as we kind of participate in this really important discussion. So these are a set of agreements that Matt, myself, and our colleagues put together based on our work with leaders in Contra Costa over the past few months. Based on a series of community strategic planning meetings, if any of you on this call were part of those sessions, these will look familiar to you. These values include authentic youth and young adult partnership, community participation, community commitment, co-interpretation, shared ownership, using equity-centered lenses, transparency internally and throughout the community, consistent respectful communication. Thanks,
And
Matt.
Nika, your audio is still a little muffled. I don't know what's happening.
Oh, it's so important. Give me 1 second. I might just
Okay.
take these out.
Okay, that might help.
And that was my fault, Nike, or Riley's fault. She thought you were going too slow, so she moved the slides. No, can't hear you. Jamie, you shouldn't have said everything was going to run smoothly earlier.
I know better. I should know better.
Any better?
I think so. Keep going and I will let you know.
Can you hear me now? Is this all better? I'll just keep going from here on out. And then if there are any more audio issues, please just let me know and make sure everyone hears. I'm getting the sounds better from Tony. So hopefully this is pretty good.
Yeah.
Great. So coming from where I left off, transparency, both internally and throughout our community, consistent and respectful communication, and challenging existing practices and beliefs. This last one is especially important for today's workshop. So I ask that you keep that one in mind. And before we move on, does anyone have any values that they'd like to add? Just so we can kind of keep that as we kind of go throughout this conversation. If not, then I think we're good to move on. Great. So here's a little overview of our agenda for today. We'll start by talking about experiences with adultism. We'll talk about that as a group. Then we'll talk about defining adultism. We'll hopefully take a little stretch break to give us a little bit before we get into the second hour of this. We'll go through some scenarios and talk about reframing. And then we'll close it out with a little bringing it home section where we can reflect on what we've talked about so far. Great. So to kick us off, we want to get started with a reflective exercise. So I ask you all to think of a time in your life when someone acted as if you didn't know what you were doing, thinking, or feeling, specifically because of your age. And we really want you to put some thought into it. So we'll actually take a few minutes to pause here, then we'll come back. But really think of a specific experience when you felt that you were disregarded, disrespected solely because of your age.
And I want to remind folks too that you should have participant instructions that we sent to you in advance. And I put in the chat, actually the two things you need, the handout and the participant instructions were in the chat. So anytime you're in a breakout group and you can't see the screen, those have all your instructions.
Okay. Hopefully everyone was able to think of an example. So we're going to send you into small groups and breakout rooms. And in the breakout rooms, we'll have you answer some of these questions on the screen here. So what did you think when that event happened? How did you feel about the other person? how did that impact your decision making? How the other person's words or actions impact your decision making? And were you right, and did it matter? That last part is especially crucial. There's a difference between whether you're right and the effect or how much it mattered. So thinking about all those things, we want to recontextualize our experience through those questions. So we'll be putting you into breakout groups soon. In addition, I just want to remind everyone of Matt's comment that these questions are part of the instructions that were sent out to you via email.
All right, you ready for him?
Yeah.
And just let me know if you're having trouble getting into breakouts, okay? Nikkei, the screen share is stopped, right? Or is it not?
We're still on the screen share.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just the, yeah, there we
That
go.
better?
There we go.
I never know what happens when it says pause screen share. Apparently it doesn't do anything.
And do you all want me to pause the recording while we're in breakouts?
Sure. Yeah.
I was in the middle of telling my.
You telling a story?
Oops. Yeah. Oops.
I know the ending of breakout sessions can be so rude. It's just like you're
Right.
yeeted out of your conversation.
Oh, I was trying to just move the message over and I accidentally hit the button. I was like, oh,
No. They're
I
probably
think what we've
wondering where you
learned,
went.
yeah, I think we learned as trainers is if you had to choose, you always want to cut them off than have them be bored and like not just be waiting till there's something for you. As
that
rude as it
makes
is. All
sense.
right, Nikkei, take it away, my friend.
Absolutely. Well, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for going through that exercise. We'd really love if one or two of you could share your thoughts or your highlights from the breakout rooms. You can either share, the full story, the full experience, or even just some of the insights or takeaways or reactions or reflections that you've had from kind of sharing that and talking about it with somebody else. Hopefully this was restorative, reflective for some of you. But if anyone wants to come off mic, and kind of just share what they're thinking, what they share, that'd be super amazing.
I'll jump in real quick. For our group, there was a definite sense that there's not a lot of respect given to youth. Mainly because they just haven't lived enough, and don't have the experience to, and that it goes for me as well. When I was young, I thought I knew everything, and just ask me, I've got the right answer, and then you have experience that comes along and you realize just how wrong you were. But for my current scenario, I couldn't think of things that I did in the past, but it was more, the way I perceive youth, in a lot of scenarios, and being dismissive about, their contributions because they haven't lived enough to have an opinion about the certain things. And in our group, we actually mentioned, well, youth actually has the power position on some of these things, especially when you start talking about technology and how they're a lot more adept at handling things than some of us older people, and actually can come to the table with a lot more information, and start establishing not only the respect but the alternative opinions that actually matter in the course of coming up with a decision. So it's kind of a two-sided story there. So anyway, that was us.
Yeah, I really like how you mentioned that, kind of your experience as a young person, and the way that you kind of felt informed how you now like kind of interact with or kind of regard young people now. I think that's really, really common. It's definitely something that I experienced, but I also like that your group kind of came to this conclusion that young people do have a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge that can be really unique and really impactful. So thank you for those insights. Does anyone else want to go? Do we want to take one more person? Feel free to just jump off mute.
If I may say something. Oh, sorry.
Oh, please go ahead, Elizabeth.
I think I cut someone. I was going to say more of an observation from our group mates, more so than one of our examples, in that some of the words that we shared with each other, you can tell really cut deep. So whatever age it may have hit us, someone mentioned in their 20s, mine was over 5-6 years ago, like all of those things, like I think we hear that rhetoric, like the youth are resilient and all of these stigmas that I think we'll get into. And that just goes to show that that is inaccurate, because it really stuck with us and it has shaped the way we are acting in our professional sphere now. And so I think I just wanted to kind of put that out there, and that you think one way, but it actually still impacts us.
Yeah, thank you so much for that observation, for recognizing kind of the deep and long-term impact that some of these, what might seem like meaningless words at the time can have on a person. I think that's really core to what we're trying to talk about here. All right, thank you. So I know that I have also definitely experienced adultism in my life. I'm a young person, I'm in my early 20s. And I think that, my whole life has kind of just been navigating, internalizing, contending with adultism in a lot of different ways. One really recent example for me is I do a lot of advocacy work. And a lot of times when I try to advocate for things, or in one particular time when I tried to advocate for budget increases for teacher training in Connecticut, where I do a lot of my work, I was told by one school board member that I wasn't far enough removed from my own time in high school to have a full understanding of the board's financial priorities, which at the time was odd. Both in the sense that, it suggested that I need to be a certain age to understand how a school's budget works. And also somehow that people who are further removed from school are the best suited to kind of make these decisions. So I think that's just one example of how it's affected my work and affected the way I approach these things. But I think Matt, was that a hand?
Yeah, no, Nika is an amazing example. And one of the things that's unique about you and what I love about you is the people that we often see here are the ones who come out stronger from all those experiences. And somebody who I won't name, this person was very brave in the group, also mentioned, and Elizabeth, I think, gave voice to this, how it stays with you. And someone talks about, like, I was silenced then, I silenced myself, and I still find it difficult to do that. So it's amazing. I can imagine, Nike, anybody who wasn't you, getting that experience and then never advocating again. We're like, oh, it's apparently I'm not old enough to do this.
Yeah, it's easy to come out on the other side and feel like, well, maybe it's just time to give up. Maybe I'm not suited for this, which is, some of what we'll talk about. But thanks everyone for kind of going through that exercise. As we go through the training today, try to keep those experiences in mind, both the ones that you thought of for yourself, maybe some of the ones that were shared with you, and kind of think about how you might reframe some of those experiences with what we're talking about. But Matt, if you could head back to the slides, we can get into more of our topic for today. So this starts the beginning of our sort of lecture part, but we think these are really important ideas to kind of ground the rest of our discussion. So we want to start with talking a little bit more about what we actually mean when we say adultism. So let's start with the definition, the one that you see on screen, partially borrowed from the Creative Youth Development National Partnership. So adultism is the systemic mistreatment and disrespect of young people, which in turn disregards their power and rights as full human beings. It is based on a set of behaviors and attitudes that assume adults are better than young people, entitled to act upon young people without their permission, and unable to trust young people to know what is right or best for themselves. So there are really two key ideas that underpin this definition, and that I want us to keep in our mind as we're continuing through this training. First is that this is all about young people. Recognizing adultism means recognizing that young people are often mistreated and often disrespected simply because they are young. Adultism isn't inherently about experience, about knowledge, about talent, It is fundamentally about age, and how age informs who we trust to make decisions for themselves and for others. And the second is, you'll see in this definition, it refers both to systemic disrespect and to a set of attitudes and behaviors. Like other forms of social mistreatment and social disempowerment, adultism exists on different social scales. It starts with the way individual adults treat and regard individual young people. But as I'm sure you all know, it has very system-wide implications. Adultism can be interpersonal, it can be organizational, it can be structural, it can be all those things at once. And given that, as we're going through the rest of this training, I encourage you to think about how adultism has influenced or impacted your organization, your team, your community relationships, the structures that we create in our community on a broader scale. So if you can head to the next slide. Thanks. So that was all pretty high level, but what does adultism actually sound like day to day? These are phrases you'll often hear at the beginning of an adultist statement or phrase or sentiment. You're too young to, wait until you're older, then you can, or then I'll let you. You'll understand when you're older. It's good for you to, often followed by something that the adult is demanding of the young person. You need to learn this, or you need to learn that. Do these sound familiar to people? If these phrases feel familiar, you can give a thumbs up. Or you can sound off in the chat if there's another phrase that you feel like you hear all the time that makes you think like this is something adultist is about to be said. Feel free to also kind of throw that in the chat. But I know for me, one that I frequently hear is, oh, that's a really great insight for someone of your age, or, that's really smart for someone of your age, which is always meant as a compliment, but like a lot of other things, definitely comes across as a little backhanded. But I think these are kind of the things that we really hear and we really easily internalize, but are kind of the foundation of what can sometimes be a sort of problematic or troublesome system of behaviors. We can head to the next slide, Matt. Oh, I like this one that Elizabeth threw into the chat. Well, back in my day, that's a really common one I hear too. So at first, those phrases that we just talked about and other adultist actions, they might seem harmless or that they're just kind of like a normal part of growing up. And they're probably things that you have heard yourself or you've seen on TV or you've maybe said to a younger person. I know that I've even said those things sometimes to people who are younger than me, just because of how much that sort of language is ingrained in our culture. But at the end of the day, these phrases are not harmless. They have very real consequences on the people on the receiving end, which we've already kind of hinted at in our kind of reflections from that first exercise. But when young people experience adultism, it has a number of very real impacts, including, triggering feelings of shame, doubts about one's own knowledge or capabilities, a tendency to hold back even really valuable contributions. Young people have a fear of being judged, criticized, or put down in adultist situations. Adultism limits young people's sense of agency. It holds back both their real and self-perceived power. It limits young people's passions, makes them feel like, what's the point of if my experience, my ideas, my contributions aren't going to be respected. It leads to disengagement. Young people stop showing up, stop contributing, hurts relationships. Adultism leads young people to lose trust in adults, become bitter and angry at them. I see that someone in the chat asked for, oh, sorry, that was not in response to me. So I'll just keep going there. These impacts, they really hold back our community. Some of these consequences will be really obvious, but a lot of times young people will hide these things from view because they don't trust that young adults will respond compassionately to their concerns. But either way, adultism hurts our community's ability to create change. It stops young people from bringing their energy, their knowledge, their experience to the table. It hurts our relationships across the community. And probably most importantly, it disempowers young people and makes them feel removed from their own communities, removed from their own power, removed from their own ability to make change. You yourself might be able to think of a time when your team, organization, worked with young people and didn't allow them to engage with their full power. And maybe you saw some of those consequences firsthand. You saw them sort of disengage, saw them kind of draw back. And maybe you can recognize how some of these consequences manifested in those people. And if not, I encourage you to kind of think back on your past experiences and reflect on some of those episodes that might have related to that. All right, next slide, Matt. Thanks. So with that, we need to understand what kinds of questions we can ask ourselves to reflect on our words and our actions, to reframe behaviors that might be adultist. Questions like, would I treat an adult the same way I'm treating this young person? Would I talk to an adult in the same way, or would it be seen as rude if I spoke to an adult like this? Would I make this decision for an adult, or do I only feel entitled to make this decision for this person because they're young? Would I expect this from an adult? Would I intentionally limit an adult's behavior in this way? So these reframing questions, with them, we're not asking you to, or we're not aiming to suggest that young people don't ever make mistakes or that they can't benefit from advice or guidance sometimes. Instead, we're saying that adults also make mistakes, and sometimes adults also can benefit from guidance, but adults are not denied and structurally limited access to knowledge, denied opportunities to lead and create change, denied the ability to contribute their experience and expertise in the same way that young people are. So as such, we're saying don't make the assumption that a young person needs your guidance or needs your advice or needs you to dictate their choices or actions, or that because you're an adult, you must be right or are entitled to direct a young person's actions. It's best to always ask if a young person wants your advice or wait until they ask you, just the way you would with an adult. So with that in mind, let's try to understand the key elements of reframing your behaviors to be anti-adultist. First, aim to build understanding and respect. Recognize that just because you were once their age doesn't always mean that you know everything about a young person. Respect the uniqueness of their experience, respect their knowledge and expertise, understand how you can offer your own support. Second, consider intersections and power dynamics. I love in that introduction, Jamie, that you brought in that kind of equity lens to be thought of, throughout all of our trainings. But age is just one social category that is constantly intersecting with race, class, gender, sexuality, and it creates a number of really complex social dynamics. So go into your interactions with young people, recognizing those power imbalances, think about them, reflect on them, and act accordingly. Third, sacrifice expediency and profit. This one sounds like a tough one, but it's also one of the most important ones. When we move too fast and when we put really quantitative outcomes over empathy and relationships, people sometimes get hurt in the process, and a lot of times our relationships with young people are the things that are taking the biggest hit. So know the cost of speed and profit, and be ready to choose relationships and choose community over them if the need be. Fourth, defer to their decisions. This doesn't mean making young people in charge of everything, but it does mean investing and giving people or young people the tools and the power to make informed decisions for themselves and their communities, and respecting those decisions once they're made, even if they're not the decisions you would have made. Fifth, compensate with money. This is a tangible one and a really important one. How would you feel if your boss said, hey, thanks for all your great contributions. Instead of a paycheck, why don't I just give you some pizza? You wouldn't, and you shouldn't stand for that. And we shouldn't expect young people to stand for that either. Their contributions are just as valuable, and they should be treated as such. And lastly, self-reflect. Think honestly, deeply, critically about your own actions, beliefs, and behaviors, and be ready to correct them as a need be. As with kind of undoing any sort of socially ingrained injustice, it takes a lot of self-reflection, it takes a lot of self-criticism, and willingness to grow over time. So replacing adultist behaviors can be challenging. It requires a lot of reflection and sometimes difficult conversations, but it's always worth it. You'll have a better relationship with young people. They'll want to contribute more, have motivation to do what they need to do, feel confident in their ability to succeed, and be more willing to add their expertise, their experience, and their skills to work that the entire community can be proud of. All right, so we made it through the more lecture part of the training.
I wonder if you want to ask the group if anybody has reflections on the last few slides. In particular, any of these keys resonate with you when like those things have worked well or haven't worked well? Have you done any of this? Has anybody here done any of these things where you're like you nailed it, or where you're looking at it like, oh, I wish we had done that? Any brave soul want to share? Any of these resonate with folks?
Yeah, I would love to hear specific examples from people's work where they feel like they, yeah, really knocked it out of the park, or maybe are thinking back and you're like, maybe we could have done it this way instead.
I can start you
This
out for a sec. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
this is Joe. I'm going to jump in real quick.
Go ahead, Joe.
So one of the things that I like about this conversation is because it, for me, the way that I see this and I'm reflecting on my life is in a lot of age ranges, I've always been considered too young. Even now, like a lot of my elders are in their 70s, but I'm still too young, even though I'm in my 40s. So there's this like, in my group, we talked a little bit about balance. How if I were to be working with somebody who's younger than I am, I have felt what it feels like to be quote unquote too young for a situation. So like I refuse to treat somebody who's younger that same way, right? Like I've learned that because of my own self-reflection and uh the way that I interact with people who are younger with it. It's so I just wanted to point that out because I think there is a balance that it doesn't really matter what age you are per se. It is, I mean, oh gosh, we have to change the way that we just view each other. I guess that's what it is. And that has to be done by self-reflection. And so that's it.
I love that. Thanks, Joe. Anybody else? And while you're trying to, I want to point out something Nike talked through that's really important. There is a difference between like what a person you're engaging with, or a young person in this case, ends up needing or asks for, or through a conversation knows or doesn't know, and what you expect of them before you have that information. And that's what we're talking about. It's not that Nike said earlier, it's not that you expect every, I don't pick an age, 16-year-old, 17-year-old. Yeah, as was said earlier by one of our amazing participants who spoke up earlier, you don't have so much life experience. Sure, it is likely that they won't know X, Y, or Z. I don't engage them already telling them or that they don't know this thing, right? That emerges through a conversation. I'm open to that being a possibility, right? But I don't automatically put them in the box. Go ahead, Hope. Sorry.
So I was just going to say that I work at a community college, and previously I've worked in financial aid specifically. Financial aid is something I consider incredibly complicated for everyone. Hardly anybody who is one of my colleagues understands financial aid. But young people, students are often expected to know how to get through the system, this process, get their financial aid. And when they don't, it's on them. They didn't educate themselves. They didn't. And then I look at my own colleagues who don't understand financial aid. They say it's too complicated. They say, go speak to a financial aid officer. And it frazzles me desperately because I'm like, this is everybody. And so what I did do at my last job is I worked at a law school, and I was able to do an orientation with students where I really just kind of leveled the playing field. I said, you are all coming from different experiences and different backgrounds. Some of you may have been on full scholarship in your undergrad. Some of you may have already experienced financial aid for the last 4 years. But I want to give you a breakdown on what financial aid means, what cost of attendance means, what all these complicated terms that nobody talks about means, and give you choice and autonomy to learn more, give you more resources, and then let you make the decisions best for you. Because that's, when it comes to finances, I think that's the most important thing we can do is give them all the education and opportunity, and then give them the opportunity to make their own decisions. But so that's just an example of ways I've tried to compensate. But financial aid is one of those ones where I really see it, and in higher ed in general.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that one. I'll say that as a college student, I definitely feel that. And I think, Yeah, I think it's so empowering when I think a lot of times young people are getting to that stage and they've been told so often that you can't do it, that they already get there and they're like, well, this is too complicated. I can't figure it out. But when you give them the tools, they really quickly realize that, oh, I can figure this out. I just needed someone to give me the tools and give me the trust to kind of work through this. And it's a really empowering feeling. So it's really amazing work that you're doing, Hope. I also see that Juno, you have your hand up. So if you want to come off mic.
Yeah, sorry, I'm also on the bus, so apologies for the background noise. Heading to class. So I see for positives I've seen a lot of positives in the work that the YAB has been doing, the Youth Action Board. It's been very refreshing to see that authentic youth engagement in practice, as opposed to it being more of a theory. I will say though, from my personal experience, both like in the work I've been doing since I graduated from program and while I was a recipient of services as a transition-aged youth in Contra Costa County, I saw a lot more examples of adultism at work and lack of recognition towards that. And we talked a little bit earlier about like consequences, and maybe we've seen them. I've seen a lot of those consequences because those are my peers, my friends who no longer feel that they can participate in these systems for whatever reason that may happen, or are less likely to participate or share their voice, or all the consequences we went over. I've seen them, and so in my friends, and so it's definitely happens, and it's I see like negatives a lot more than I see the positives, like people of things like YAB, where people are recognizing that in the youth space.
Go ahead,
So,
Matt. I see you took one
No,
off.
I love that, Juno. It's great to virtually see you. I know I physically can't see you, but I'm so glad you're here. The consequences are real, and we're going to talk about. Nike is going to lead us through some scenarios. But Nike, if it's okay, I want to give you my personal mantra. So I've worked with young people since I was 12 years old, 12, 13, coaching, mentoring, doing this. I love it's and it's part of my identity. But as I got older and then into my 30s and into my 40s, the distance removed and what it requires of us, because again, we're getting all of this input all over our day and in our community to be adult. It's very ubiquitous. It's hard. It'd be fun to map out in your day, walk around and point out all the subtleties. And so I tell myself, whether I'm working with a 22-year-old or my 3-year-old daughter or her 2-year-old friends, every single one of them, I tell myself, I take you seriously. I can learn from you. You might be right. And I'm excited to work with you. I don't always spell out those words, right? Because I've internalized it, but that gets me in the right frame of mind with a 2-year-old who just fell. And I don't think the fall was all that serious. And what's our normal refrain? Oh, you're okay. Oh, you're not hurt. What we're immediately communicating to that 2-year-old is you don't understand what hurt means. Oh, your experience wasn't real. Oh, whatever the thing is. Is my 3-year-old likely fine when she falls off her bike? Yeah, sure. Is her experience of being hurt real? Absolutely. And I'll tell you what, sometimes I'm wrong. I've caught myself with like, oh no, that really is a good scrape, right? So even, it doesn't matter what your age is, right? That's just an extreme example. But if I remove the fact that she's 3 and, oh, you don't know what hurt means, and I just addressed her, then I get the information, maybe she's not hurt, and then I can do what I need to do as a dad. Or it reveals to me that she really is hurt. And whether it's 3 or 5 or 15 or 20 or 55, or the example we heard before, if you're a 40-year-old with a bunch of 7-year-olds, I take you seriously. I can learn from you. You might be right. And I'm excited to work with you. If you just start there, you're likely to be on the right path moving forward. And Nika, as you read us through the scenarios, that may help you uncover what's wrong in these scenarios.
Thanks so much for that, Matt. And thanks also, Juno, for your input. Super, super helpful. I think we have time for a little stretch break. Why don't we come back it's 10:57 right now. Why don't we do 5 minutes? Can 3 minutes? Okay. Matt's saying 3 minutes. Why don't people try and get back by 11 on the dot, and then we can resume from there. But feel free to stretch, stand up, use the restroom if needed. And thank you, whoever remembered to continue the recording.
I never remember, so that's why I took credit. I'm so proud of myself.
Awesome. Okay. So we're going to go through a little activity that will hopefully allow us to kind of put what we just talked about, what we just discussed, into practice. So we're going to once again split you into small breakout rooms. And we're going to provide you with a set of scenarios. Those should have already been shared with you on your participant instructions. There should be a link that says link to role-playing scenarios that will take you to these scenarios that we're talking about. So how this will work is that you'll each start with an assigned scenario. And then for each one, you'll answer the following questions. If you were a young person, how might this interaction make you feel? How might it affect your relationship to the staff and to the organization? What about the scenario is adultist? And what could the staff do differently? So we'll spend about 20 minutes in these breakout groups. So you'll start with the scenario you're assigned. But if you finish that one, you're free to keep going. So if you start on scenario number 4 and you finish that in 5 minutes, feel free to go to scenario 5, 6, 7 until we run out of time. So after we all go through the scenarios in our breakout groups, we'll come back together as a big group and share some reflections, share some thoughts, talk about each of the scenarios, and kind of think about what they mean and what we can learn from them. So how are breakout groups coming along?
So here's the trick, everybody. One, if you can please participate. I know some of you, we won't ask questions. If you could be on camera, even better. Just with the scenarios, it helps out to have a conversation. We know that y'all have potentially some intense days going on or in travel, but do what you can. The name of your group is the scenario where you start. So if yours says scenario 9, you start on scenario 9, then go to scenario 1, 2, 3, 4. If you're scenario 6, start in scenario 6, then go to 7. The reason we're staggering is to make sure that at least some group covers each of the scenarios when we do the debrief. So just look at the top of your group name. It should say a scenario name. I think I got that all done. Again, if you're having problems with your group, just let us know. Right now, for example, there are a couple people who are the only people in their breakout groups. We will switch you to make sure you're in a different breakout group, so you have people. Don't worry about that. Any questions before we send y'all off?
I'm just going to add, I uploaded the document also into the chat. I think if folks can't access Google, and maybe if they can't download it, can we put that link back in the chat?
Yeah, let's definitely do that.
You probably have it more easily to access.
Yeah, we'll do.
The only other thing I'll add is that we might have more than, so there are 9 scenarios. We might have more than 9 breakout groups. If you're a number higher than 9, just kind of count backwards to where.
I got it. I got it figured out. I've named all the.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, Matt has got it figured out.
Yep. And all right, if everybody's ready, I'm gonna open all the rooms. Good luck. You got about 20 minutes, and then we'll bring you back. Okay. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you all for bearing with us as well, with people coming in and out. The team over here, the H3 and Mac teams, we were trying to get you back into the same room and made sure if you were in a room with no one was talking, you got to a good place. We hope that was not too disruptive, but I love seeing, we can see in the breakout screen when someone's talking, and it seemed like someone was talking right to the end in just about every group. That was wonderful. All right, Nika, I think we got them all back.
Okay, awesome. Well, first of all, thank you everyone for working through the scenarios. As Matt said, for bearing through any breakout room difficulties if you had them. So let's take a minute to talk about what you kind of just discussed as a big group and hopefully learn from the scenarios y'all completed together. So the way this will work is I'll just start by calling out the first scenario. Anyone who is in a group where you covered the first scenario or that was your initial scenario, feel free to come off mute. You can read the scenario and then just give like a brief 20-second overview of what your group discussed, what you noticed about the scenario, what you might change. Does that sound good to everyone? Okay. So let's start with scenario 1. Was anyone who started with scenario 1, do you want to come off mute, read the scenario, and then kind of give a brief overview of what you discussed?
Can read it and
Awesome.
then discuss it a little bit. Okay, so scenario 1, Jacob, the young adult, confides in Jennifer, the staff, that he has started injecting heroin. Jennifer is worried that Jacob will develop an addiction or overdose. Hoping to change his behavior, she tells him that this is the stupidest decision he has ever made and asks if he's trying to ruin his life. And so a little bit about what we talked about in the group was that it took a lot for Jacob to open up to Jennifer in this. So there must have been a lot of trust that was built up previously, and it might have all just been gone in those few seconds after her response. It would affect his relationship to other staff in the organization, because if this is how you treat someone that's just opened up to you about such a big issue, I don't know. It speaks to the staff. It could speak to the organization, and how the staff views their clients, whoever they're serving. And then what's adultist about the scenario? Her response. The response was adultist. And then we also talked about how it's kind of like a power move, to tell someone that this is the stupidest thing or you're trying to ruin their life. It creates like a power imbalance, and it's discouraging, it's unvalidating. And what the staff could do differently was validate Jacob and then, check in with Jacob, see what his next steps are, because just because he's sharing this doesn't mean that he wants to seek services. Maybe the first step is him telling the staff, like, this is what's going on in my life. So putting the action in Jacob's plate and then just supporting whatever Jacob wants to do.
Yeah, you absolutely nailed that. Your group absolutely nailed that. Recognizing that, calling the decision stupid immediately is such a lost opportunity to build a relationship. This young person has come to Jennifer asking for trust and asking to be a resource and for support. And it really feels like, the staff in that scenario betrayed that. And you really recognized that and recognized how invalidating that experience could have been. So no notes, that was fantastic. Thank you. All right. Someone who covered scenario 2 as their initial scenario, do you want to read your scenario, give a brief overview of what you discussed?
Yeah, I'm going to speak on scenario 2. Chris stops by the drop-in center to shower and eat after being released from jail. George sees him and says, "I'm so happy to see you, and I told you you would end up in jail if you kept up that behavior." So we all agreed that we needed to have stopped at "It's so good to see you," and that'd be the end of it. My colleague, one of my colleagues indicated also that they may or may not have information that this person was sent to jail, but that you certainly don't want to bring that up. There may be, that may end up making the person feel like they can't trust both the individual as well as the organization or the agency that they've gone to, and wondering why and how it is that they have that information. So we spent quite a bit of time actually then talking about, so first of all, we thought that the mantra of, I'm taking you seriously, and the rest of it was a really good way to get into the right framework. We talked about the fact that your approach and your openness to the client or to the person is important, is even more important than the words you say, but that the words that you say also are very important, and you want to be, so one of the individuals talked about the fact that they do outreach, but that they make sure to meet with the person in person to start building that trust and that relationship with that individual, being able to track their nonverbal communication and knowing that trust takes time and patience, and really getting to know that person so that you can know both that they share their own experience, so you have a better sense of where they're coming from. And please, if I missed anything, Leslie or Kirsty, please add.
Thank you, Karen. You said that very well. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too, Kirsty. Thank you.
I loved your breakdown and how you described it. I wanted to point out how seductive "I told you so" can be. And it's pretty obvious in this scenario, but when we're working with younger people, "I told you so" emerges in a lot of different. Sometimes you're actually saying, "I told you so, I told you this." And sometimes you're saying in other kinds of ways where you're leaning into that quick teaching moment. Like "I told you so" can actually feel benign. It can feel like, "Oh, I told you that would happen because this." And you're like, "Oh, yeah, I'm explaining what I just explained to you before. So maybe I'm reinforcing the behavior." I've been a teacher for a long, long time, for um, not quite 30 years, but I'm getting there. I've never, that's never worked in my experience. The "I told you so" moment immediately puts the person on defensive. And even if you're telling them that and they're somewhat receptive to it, they're not coming to that information from their own perspective, right? There's no journey to an "I told you so." That's like a telling someone. It's very hard for someone to learn when you just tell them something. So if instead, even if there was a teaching moment in that relationship, and a lot of what the group apparently talked about was about listening and engaging in learning, right? Not teaching and learning, is engaging them in questions and getting them to come to that perspective. So it seems obvious that it's bad here, and it's in two sentences of this scenario. But "I told you so" comes out all the time, and the deceptiveness is, again, it feels like teaching. It is not a teaching frame. Teaching frames is about asking questions and getting someone to come to an understanding. This is about telling something and then expecting telling to do the teaching for you.
Thanks for that, Matt. Thanks for that, Karen, in your group. That was a really lovely overview. Do you want to have someone from scenario 3 read their scenario, give a quick overview of what they talked about as a group?
Okay, I'll do it. Let's see. We had Terrence walks into a group session with bloodshot eyes and has a hard time writing his name on the sign-in sheet. Assuming he is under the influence, Benny, the group leader, says, "You can't participate in the group while you're high." So we looked at that first. Benny just made assumptions and didn't ask Terrence anything about what was going on, what could have happened the night before. He just assumed that Terrence was getting high. Apparently, he just kind of bust him out in the middle of the group and just basically said that and didn't ask him. So looking at Terrence's behavior, Terrence might have gotten defensive in the group and may have lashed out a little bit because it says something about his behavior and that he's following the rule of the group, that he can't participate. And so Terrence may have needed that group. It could have been, a group that he discusses his feelings, or something that he does. And the assumptions may have made him not want to come back to the group because he wasn't asked how he felt or what was going on. And then just focusing on a rule and not focusing on what could have been going on with Terrence could have really thrown Terrence to, into spiral, and, into anything, but to not be able to discuss what was going on was, we felt was kind of not a correct way to kind of handle the situation. So,
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for recognizing that this entire scenario is based on an assumption. We don't really know anything other than, red bloodshot eyes. That could mean he didn't get enough sleep the night before. It could mean, maybe he was just having an emotional moment. There's a million reasons. But it seems like Benny came in with an assumption or an expectation of who Terrence is and what Terrence does that was really limiting in this situation. So thanks for recognizing that. And thanks for recognizing that Benny was so focused on the rule that he missed an opportunity to build a relationship with Terrence, and might have even, helped the group back as a whole in that moment. All right, let's keep this moving because we are at 11:40. Someone from scenario number 4, do you want to read out your scenario and give a quick overview of what you discussed?
Hi, everybody. My name is Brittany. We had scenario number 4. After reviewing his monthly budget with his case manager, Frank learns that he has overspent for the month. His case manager tells him, "You need help managing your money, and we could find someone who will be your rep payee, a person who receives the client's check and pays their bills for them." Um, First of all, we talked a lot about how this can create like an unsafe environment for Frank to make mistakes during his journey working with his case manager, and how it kind of removes Frank's autonomy from his case. And then we also spoke about how this breaks a lot of trust within the case manager and the youth, ultimately leading to an environment where Frank does not feel comfortable with asking for help or asking for suggestions around his case. And I just want to say we had a really good discussion. We made it to scenario 6. But overall, I think that this just really removes the autonomy from the person who's working with the case manager, and then it also exerts some power and control in the case where it just leads to an unsafe working relationship.
Yeah, amazing. That really checked off everything. Ultimately, this is a situation about, you've seen someone made a mistake, came into a little bit of trouble, and the immediate reaction is, now I have to remove your agency, which is not something that people normally do to adults. That is something that is, really common that people in power will do to young people. And so kind of seeing that removing agency is the first reaction there is really core to what is adultism about the scenario. All right, moving on to scenario 5. Is anyone who started with that one want to read the scenario and talk about what they discussed?
Hello, I can read scenario 5. It says, Jose is invited to tell his story at a fundraising dinner. Afterwards, he is greeted by a caseworker who tells him, "I had no idea you were so articulate. Thank you for sharing your story. It is so hard to hear about all you have had to go through, and I just feel so sorry for you." Yikes.
Yikes, and happens all the time.
Right. Right. So what we talked about was, we don't really know the context of Jose's story, and he might have been speaking of something that might have been, a positive for him, not necessarily something negative. But for this person, this case manager, they're viewing it as like something he had to overcome, which may not be the case. They may not have been speaking in that context, but that's how she heard it. So that whole intent versus impact, we talked about that. And then also the line about being articulate, like, why would you assume he's not? So the assumptions, the bias, that I feel sorry for you, just kind of harsh, because maybe he wasn't soliciting that kind of sympathy in we just don't have the context of what his speech was. I mean, I know he was telling his story, but to me, that doesn't necessarily mean that it was a negative, So yeah, a lot of things going on in this particular scenario. But we were talking about this case manager might need some implicit bias training, some compassion and strength-based practice training or something. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Really hit the nail on the head. And for the sake of time, I won't make too many more comments. But if we could have someone from scenario 6 read out their scenario and give a really quick overview of what they discussed.
Hi, we had scenario 6, and it's just a group of young people that lived experience for homelessness, has been assembled to provide feedback on how to improve services in their community. For 2 hours, they are asked to share their personal experiences and basic services. they received a $10 gift card and pizza for their participation. We just pretty much, there's a lot of things, few things here that first of all, the young person the young people who were asked for their perspective, we were just concerned about the context of how they were asked for their perspective, if they wanted to do it, and the fact that they are personal experiences about, you know, their interaction with direct services, their basic needs, which can be very sensitive. Their personal experience is not an exchange for pizza. And, you know, that's to us, we were saying that's nice. And this organization may have meant well, but this organization probably should have gone about this a different way, even though most people who are unhoused do need food. Anything would help, but we can't just be demeaning for them sharing their personal experience for some pizza and you know, participation. And also, I think we also said that I think it's a bias that all young people love pizza. Like, just give a kid pizza and everything will be happy. You know, we do have some young people that have different dietary. You know, everybody's life isn't the same. So we just lump that into, oh yeah, just give them pizza and they'll be fine. So there was a lot of different things here that we came up with.
Yeah, thank you. You're totally right. Pizza is definitely the cliche. We're gonna move on to scenario 7. But just before we do that, I'm gonna ask, just to make sure that we have enough time to finish before noon, that everyone kind of try to keep their comments short, which is not to say anything about the last 6 people who have gone, who have all given incredible and thorough answers. I've not had to add anything, but just to make sure that we have enough time to finish on time. But with that, does someone from scenario 7 want to read the scenario and give a brief overview of their insights?
Sure, I got it. Hello, everyone. So very quickly, scenarios that Jill and her girlfriend have just broken up and Jill is devastated. Jill confides in Ahmed, his staff, about how upset she is. Ahmed said, "It's your first big breakup, you'll get over it." So yeah, I just wrote that his reaction was like very dismissive, and as an adult, not understanding how this young person's like lived experience and like how that experience like would be relative to how they perceive something in their life, and how, I mean, even if they weren't young, but like just how lived experience can influence like your emotional reaction. And I question his intention as someone who works with youth and what they want to get out of how they connect with them and support them in that way.
Yeah, totally. Really key there is, diminishing the response. It goes back to what Matt said about you don't understand hurt, you haven't experienced it yet. So thank you for that. Someone who had scenario 8, do you want to read the scenario and give us your thoughts? If not, we can also do anyone who got to scenario 8 and discuss it as a group.
Curious if this sounds familiar to anybody.
That may have gotten screwed up. This is Tony. I think we originally got sent to scenario 8, but we didn't realize that. So Unique and I talked about it, the first one instead of 8. So I don't know that anybody actually got to.
I have scenario 8.
Go ahead, Anastasia.
Sorry. It says Chris is at a community meeting with Jamal, the director of the organization. At the meeting, Jamal introduces Chris as one of my kids. We all agreed that if we were Chris, that we would feel pretty offended It was really offending, how his boss introduced him as his kid and did not introduce him with his position title. It kind of created a power imbalance of, I'm the adult, I'm his boss, and he's just my kid. He doesn't really hold any power. His position is less important. And it would affect his relationship. It would probably make him really distant. But I also think that it would make him try to work harder so he can prove himself that he's more than just sorry, my cat is bothering me. That his position is important and that he's more than just, an employee. And I think it was very adultist, how he just introduced him. He didn't really put any importance on his position or to Chris as a person. And he definitely, like, next time this happens, he could introduce him with his position title, instead of just my kid and demeaning his work.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially that phrase or that word "my" can be really uncomfortable. What do you mean I'm your kid? That can be especially uncomfortable for a young person. So thank you for that. And let's take it home with someone who covered scenario 9. We can also do the same thing here. If anyone covered scenario 9, feel free to chime in.
You all have been so brave. Did anybody cover scenario 9?
I was in scenario 9, but my partner wasn't feeling well, and I got sent back to a different room, and there was nobody in room 9 to cover that.
I see. Should we just cover that one really quickly?
Yeah, let's debrief it as a group. Yeah.
So I can read the scenario for that one. While Tasha is doing street outreach, she sees Lee on the corner appearing to be soliciting sex for money. The next day, when Lee comes into the drop-in center, Tasha, concerned about Lee's safety, approaches him and says she is really worried that he is putting his life at risk by doing sex work. So what do you think about that one? If anyone wants to chime in really quickly, or since we're low on time, we can also cover that.
Did anybody have a strong reaction? Yeah, who has, now that you're all experts, who has some insight?
I think before she started asking Lee any questions, she came with assumptions first. And I think that can always be pretty dangerous, especially when you're saying that, I think this is really unsafe for you, but you're not even asking any questions in regards to what you saw or what you observed. So that came up for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And a recurring theme throughout these scenarios, making assumptions and acting on those assumptions. Yeah, and also just, really focusing on Tasha's own feelings, saying that, I'm worried instead of, kind of thinking about how can we be holistically considering Lee's safety here, really putting, the emphasis on Tasha as, the staff member instead of, Lee as the individual. All right, so I think that covers our scenarios. Thank you everyone so much for working through all of those. We have a few brief wrap-up activities to kind of take us home here. Matt, are you able to share screen again?
I can, and I'm excited to hear reflections that you have from all of that great work that we just did while I'm sharing the screen. There we go. So yeah, with a few minutes left, so I want you to get to this, and I wonder for you, like you mentioned the assumptions, the big takeaways, if you want folks to really sit with some key themes from those scenarios, what are some of those big takeaways that everybody should be seeing in all of those debriefs?
Yeah, absolutely. So assumptions are part of that, core to that. Also core to that is recognizing young people as whole people and not people who need to be controlled, directed, always advised. When we made our alterations to some of these scenarios, one really common thing is recognizing people's autonomy and giving compassion to their entire situation, not just kind of immediately responding to an action and trying to redirect it. And that kind of goes back to our kind of key elements that we're talking about before. Understanding, respect, trust is a big one, compassion. Those are all really kind of underpinning how we respond to each of these scenarios. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Matt.
No, that was great. That was great. I mean, even if, like, to your core, we're thinking we're right, and Nika talked earlier about, we framed it differently about values over efficiency, right? Kindness, the young person over efficiency, and that could be dollars and cents. That could be I'm exhausted right now and just want to cut to the chase, right? Even if you ended up being right all along, if you skip to the end, if you dehumanize, if you don't trust in the person, if you're not curious, if you don't appreciate and approach them with seriousness, with learning, with love, as someone else was mentioning earlier, the outcome isn't going to matter because you've broken that trust, because you haven't built a relationship, because you haven't been open to learning all those different things. But like the process really matters. And there's a great quote from a colleague who I learned a ton from when we were developing this a few years ago. And she pulled out this Brene Brown quote. This is in your guide, in your handout guide, that young people are always asking 3 questions. Am I seen? Am I heard? Am I valued? Everything adults do provides the answers to these questions. So understanding that, yeah, we're overanalyzing words a little bit, and sometimes we're a little casual, and again, we're tired, or we need to get to the chase, or we've got 5 other clients, or whatever it is. But those words matter, and that process matters to that young person. And they're going to respond to that, whether it's verbally, whether you know that they respond to it, they're going to do that.
All right. Thanks so much for that, Matt. So I know we're pretty close to time. I understand if you need to hop off, but a few things I want to say before anyone starts heading out. One is that this entire worksheet, including those scenarios, if you didn't get through all of them, or if you did get through all of them and you found them useful, this is something that can be shared with your colleagues, with your peers, with other organizations, and kind of, spreading this knowledge around the community. The other thing is that Matt is sharing a survey in the chat. That survey is both a reflection on what you have kind of learned from this training, as well as any potential suggestions about how this training could be better, stronger, more helpful in the future. And then lastly, what you see on the screen here is a couple reflection questions. If you recall back to when we were kind of talking about or defining adultism, we said that it can exist on multiple scales, interpersonal, organizational, structural, and social. So these questions are kind of designed to help you think about each of these. If you would like, feel free to take a screenshot of, I see that the form requires submission. We'll get on fixing that as soon as possible. But if you'd like, I might need to do that, Matt. If you'd like, feel free to take a screenshot of these questions if you have to head out early. But they are really important to kind of be thinking about and reflecting on this workshop as a whole. Let's see here. Okay. If you want to resend the link, Matt, I think it should be accessible now. Apologies for that.
On it.
Right. If anyone's still having trouble,
it's working.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you both for tremendous training.
Yeah, thank you for the time. I hope this was really valuable. It was really fun for me to do. And it was fun to kind of see all the reflections that people had. It was really, really great experience to hear from you all.
I'm going to encourage you, please take this guide. We've got extra resources, links to extra resources in the guide. Do those scenarios with your teams. Reach out to us with questions. Again, this really is, I love this training, and it's step 1. And unless you continue to engage with material, a colleague of mine who developed this years ago with me says you got to have it in your back pocket. So you're not thinking about it when that young person has that question or person you're working with. So it does take training. Hope to engage with you in the future. Please reach out with questions. We really appreciate you being with us.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Jamie and Nike.